Good morning. This hearing will now come to order. This is the first hearing of the 116th Congress by the Subcommittee on Technology Modernization. This subcommittee was created last year and recognized that all aspects of implementing technology at the Department of Veterans Affairs needs to be sustained attention and oversight. I'm pleased that the work that was begun last year will continue, and I'm honored to be part of the effort. I look forward to working with my colleague, Ranking Member Banks, and the other members of the subcommittee on this very important mandate. VA has many technology modernization projects underway, from the electronic health record modernization, the financial management business transformation, and the efforts to update its supply chain system. Congress has also given the VA several critical programs to implement, including the Mission Act and the Forever GI Bill. These programs will need to have strong technology systems that support the successful delivery of health care and benefits to our veterans. The subcommittee will engage in oversight of each of these programs over the next several months. However, I thought it'd be helpful to begin the subcommittee's work with an assessment of the office within the VA that bears much of the responsibility for implementing that technology that will support these critical programs. The Office of Information and Technology, I will refer to as OIT, is responsible for all aspects of technology modernization in the VA, including the acquisition, development, and implementation. OIT is also responsible for making sure that VA's critical systems are secure and that veterans' personal data is protected. It's clear that OIT has struggled in its mission. Many decades of oversight by the Government Accountability Office and the Office of Inspector General have found and documented systematic leadership and management challenges at OIT. Progress at solving these problems, unfortunately, has been halting. Today, I'd like to explore the root causes of these challenges and to identify the barriers for improvement. And if OIT has made progress, I'd like to explore that as well so that we can determine how to successfully replicate those results. One of the major problems at OIT has been the high turnover in leadership. VA has had 5 chief information officers in 4 years. I'm glad that the confirmed leader is now in place, and I wish Mr. Jaffer success in his position, and I hope that he's able to implement some of the critical change that is needed at OIT. However, you will note that we have an empty chair at the table where OIT should be represented. The subcommittee invited Mr. Jaffer to the hearing today, but the VA declined because he's testifying before the full committee later this afternoon. That's somewhat understandable, and we told the VA we would accept a deputy for testimony today. I want to be clear that we won't stand on ceremony in the subcommittee. We want to engage with knowledgeable management and staff, no matter their title, to better understand these challenges and figure out the solutions. Unfortunately, VA refused this subcommittee's request. I hope we will hear from OIT at a subcommittee hearing in the near future, because if we want VA to be able to successfully deliver health care and benefits to our veterans, OIT has to be an effective part of that effort. There is no doubt that we want OIT to succeed at its mission, because its success means that veterans get the highest level of care and reliable access to the benefits they have earned. I'm pleased to have members of our oversight community here today to help the subcommittee further its oversight of technology at VA. I look forward to testimony from the GAO and OIG and engaging in discussion with them now and moving forward. Thank you. I would now like to recognize my colleague, Ranking Member Banks, for 5 minutes to deliver any opening remarks he may have.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is my privilege to be working with you on this subcommittee this Congress. We got off to a great start with oversight of the EHR modernization program last year. That continues to be my priority, but our jurisdiction extends to all enterprise technology projects, and I commend you for considering other issues as well. The VA Office of Information and Technology is responsible for the networks, computers, and software that VBA, VHA, and NCA rely on to carry out their missions. I was relieved to see the Chief Information Officer, Mr. Giffer, confirmed by the Senate on the very last day of the 115th Congress. We had a candid, encouraging meeting in my office last month, and I look forward to working with him. I understand that Mr. Giffer will be testifying before the full committee this afternoon, but I was surprised and frankly disappointed that not only was he unable to appear this morning, but VA declined to send any witness in his place from OIT. I was hoping to start this year with a discussion of OIT's activities and priorities. I appreciate the Secretary outlining his focuses: EHRM, the Mission Act, supply chain integration with DoD, and financial systems modernization. Given the circumstances, I am going to take this opportunity to outline mine. VA's #1 IT problem, before we even get into specific programs, is that operation and maintenance of legacy systems and fixed infrastructure cost consume almost all of the OIT budget. When I joined this committee, that percentage was about 80, and now it is approaching 90. We have been devoting more attention to IT, but the situation is actually getting worse. The administration is proposing a $240 million OIT increase on a base of about a $4.1 billion. I agree we have to invest in IT, but I need to know this will actually bend that cost curve and produce some new capabilities rather than perpetuate the current state of affairs. As to EHRM, OIT's role is upgrading the networks and computer hardware at the medical centers in anticipation of Cerner being installed. I am cautiously optimistic that OIT is actually ahead of the curve here. Although OIT's role has not changed, VA has decided to shift many of these infrastructure costs out of the EHRM appropriation into the OIT appropriation. I do not object to that in principle, but I am concerned about transparency. As to the Mission Act IT systems, chiefly the decision support tool, I appreciate the media bringing attention to the issue, but we are getting a lot of alarming conjecture without the basic information about what the projects are and what they are supposed to do. I look forward to discussing that in this afternoon's hearing. As to the VA adopting DIMLs from DoD and integrating the supply chains, I generally agree with the concept, but I have been given very little information on which to base an opinion. The subcommittee needs an in-depth briefing on the pilot site, and we need to know the long-term plan. I think adding DIMLs to the EHRM scope of work in Spokane and Seattle might be one too many blocks on the Jenga tower. I will say that I am concerned about what impact the cost of these new systems for the Mission Act, supply chain, and others will have on bending that operations and maintenance cost curve. DST is a new system integrating data from a half a dozen legacy systems, and it is going to layer on top of them, not replace any of them. Integrating DST with CPRS is messy and difficult, and the whole goal of EHRM is to get rid of CPRS. DIMLs has existed in DoD for a long time, but is going to be a complicated integration into VA. I see a natural tension here between adding new systems that are necessary to VA's mission and retiring old systems to bend that cost curve. Finally, as to the Financial Management Business Transformation Program, I need to see some forward movement. VA started FMBT almost 3 years ago, and I have watched it relaunch 3 separate times, balloon in cost to above $2 billion, but not deliver any new capabilities. We have been told that the old financial and accounting software barely holds together, and VA's ability to pass an audit is hanging on by a thread. That sort of thing absolutely gets my attention, but FMBT stalls and the status quo seems to continue without incident. That makes me question the urgency that VA used to sell this program. I appreciate our witnesses from OIG and GAO being here, and I'm eager to hear your perspectives, and with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. I will now introduce the witnesses that have come before the subcommittee today. First, I'd like to introduce Carol Harris, who's the Director of Information Technology Acquisition Management Issues at the U.S. Government Accountability Office. Brent Aranti, is the Deputy Assistant Inspector General in the Office of Audits and Evaluations in the VA Office of the Inspector General. And he is accompanied by Michael Bowman, who is the Director of Information Technology and Security Audits Division within the Office of Inspector General. Welcome. We will now hear the prepared statements from our panel members. Your written statements in full will be included in the hearing record. Without objection, Ms. Harris, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lee. Chair Lee, Ranking Member Banks, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting us to testify today on the state of IT acquisitions and operations at VA. As requested, I'll briefly summarize our prior work on the department's systems modernization efforts over the last decade, as well as its IT acquisition reform and cybersecurity efforts. As you know, the use of IT is crucial to helping VA effectively serve the nation's veterans. Each year, the department spends billions of dollars on its information systems and assets. VA's IT budget now exceeds $4 billion annually. This morning, I'd like to highlight 3 key points from our body of IT-related work at VA. First, VA's management of IT system modernization efforts continues to be high risk. VA's track record of delivering failed or troubled IT systems is a large part of why we designated VA healthcare as a high-risk area for the federal government in 2015. For example, VA pursued 3 efforts over nearly 2 decades to modernize VISTA, its health information system. These efforts experienced high costs, challenges to ensuring interoperability of health data, and ultimately did not result in a modernized system. VA recently initiated its 4th effort called the Electronic Health Record Modernization, and the program is already facing serious challenges. As we've previously reported, the governance plan for this program has not been fully defined, nor has the VA fully implemented our recommendation to define a role of a key office in its governance plans. On VA's Veterans Benefits Management System, its system for processing disability benefit claims, we pointed out that the system was not able to fully support disability and pension claims, as well as appeals processing. The development of the system was expected to be completed in 2015, but that did not occur, and VA had not produced a plan that identified when the system would be completed. We also noted 3 areas that were in need of increased management attention: cost estimating, system availability, and system defects. Accordingly, we made 5 recommendations to improve VA's ability to more effectively complete and deliver this system. The department has only addressed 1 of the 5 recommendations thus far. My second point, VA's progress to better manage its IT operations is uneven, and its CIO authorities continue to have key weaknesses. I'm pleased to report that the department has implemented a comprehensive software license management program based on 6 recommendations we made in 2014. As a result, VA is able to analyze agency-wide software license data such as usage and costs, and it subsequently identified about $65 million in cost savings over 3 years from analyzing just 1 of its licenses. However, progress is much more limited when it comes to accurately assigning risk to VA's IT investment portfolio, as well as meeting OMB's targets for data center closures and optimization. The department also lacks policies fully addressing the role and responsibilities of the CIO in 4 of 6 statutory areas, including IT workforce and budgeting. Ensuring that these CIO authorities are formalized is especially critical for the department, as they have had 10 CIOs since 2004 and 6 since 2012, thus making the average CIO tenure at VA less than 2 years. Lastly, in the area of cybersecurity, VA has more work to ensure its high-impact systems are adequately protected. These systems hold sensitive information, the loss of which could cause the nation catastrophic harm. In May 2016, we found VA had implemented a number of security controls over selected systems, but that it had also not always effectively implemented access controls, patch management, and contingency planning to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of these critical systems. These weaknesses existed in part because VA lacked a robust information security program. Moving forward in these 3 areas I noted, It will be critical for VA to fully and effectively implement our 17 open recommendations as soon as possible. Doing so will better position the department to more effectively deliver secure systems and IT operations that meet mission needs and also, where available, realize additional cost savings. That concludes my statement. I look forward to addressing your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. Mr. Aranti, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member Banks, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Office of Inspector General's oversight of VA's information and technology. VA faces challenges in developing IT systems it needs to support its current goals and overall mission. For over 20 consecutive years, information security has been reported as a material weakness in VA's consolidated financial statement audit. Our audits have shown that IT systems development and management at the VA is a long-standing high-risk challenge. Despite some incremental advances, our reports indicate VA IT programs are still often susceptible to cost overruns, schedule slippages, and performance problems. Further, VA struggles to maintain a permanent CIO. Since June of 2013, VA has had 6 permanent or acting CIOs. From January 2017 to January 2019, there have been 3 acting CIOs. With such turnover in a key position, it is difficult for VA to support and drive IT innovation for the department. In fiscal year 2016, the VA's Chief Information Officer formed an Enterprise Cybersecurity Strategy Team, also known as ECST, that developed an Enterprise Cybersecurity Strategic Plan. The plan was designed to help VA achieve transparency and accountability while securing veteran information through teamwork and innovation. The team's scope included management of current cybersecurity efforts, as well as the development and review of VA's operational requirements from desktop to software to network protection. The ECST has launched 31 plans of actions to address previously identified weaknesses. We continue to see information system security deficiencies similar in type and risk level to our findings in prior years and an overall inconsistent implementation of the security program. Our annual FISMA audits indicate that the Enterprise Cybersecurity Plan efforts has not been fully effective in addressing or eliminating material weaknesses found in VA's information security program for fiscal year 2018. Examples of some of those weaknesses identified are legacy financial management system, password standards not consistently implemented, and users provided inappropriate access to some systems, and systems not securely configured to mitigate vulnerabilities. VA is also challenged in developing IT systems needed to support mission goals. Recent OIG reports disclose that some progress has been made in timely deploying system functionality because of the agile system development methodology. However, despite these incremental advances, VA struggles with cost overruns and performance shortfalls in its efforts to develop several major mission-critical systems. VA's mechanism for overseeing IT program management has improved, but has not been fully effective in controlling these IT investments. Our work has demonstrated that VA continues to struggle with its IT investments in securing IT systems. Some improvements in information security management have become evident with the inception of the ECST initiative. However, more work remains to be done, and VA needs to remain focused on addressing OIG recommendations in the security and development of IT systems. Until a proven process is in place to ensure control across the enterprise, the IT material weaknesses may stand, and VA's mission-critical systems and sensitive veterans' data may remain at risk of attack or compromise. Madam Chair, this concludes my statement. We would be happy to answer any of your questions or questions from other members of the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aranti. We will now begin the question and answer portion of the hearing, and I'd like to start by asking a few questions of Ms. Harris from the GAO. The GAO has included the VA on its high-risk list since 2015, at least partially because of the information technology struggles. In your report to congressional committees in March of 2019, GAO found that the VA had regressed in the area of leadership commitment. Will you explain GAO's views on why this rating changed for the worse?
Yes, ma'am. So the reason why VA regressed in this area is because of the frequent turnover in the CIO leadership. Again, the average turnover, or the average tenure of the VA CIO is less than 2 years, and that's a major problem. Our work has shown that the CIO needs to be in office roughly 3 to 5 years to be effective, and about 5 to 7 years for any major change initiative to take hold in a large public sector organization. And so that's the primary reason as to why VA regressed in that area.
Thank you. What is the status of the VA's efforts to address the recommendations that GAO had made in relation to VA's IT management issues?
Well, we have made 29 recommendations in total related to the IT management challenges. VA has closed roughly 40% of those recommendations thus far, so there are about 60% that are remaining. And so those are focused on, related to the disability benefit system, and ensuring that that they have a plan in place for when they intend to complete the remaining functionality for that system. That's one of the priority recommendations that we have identified. Another priority recommendation that we believe VA should implement as soon as possible is defining the role of the Interagency Program Office on its Electronic Health Records Modernization Program. And they should do that as soon as possible. And then the last priority recommendation of that remaining 60% that are open are related to data center optimization areas, because as Mr. Banks had noted, 80% of the OINT budget is mired in that legacy system money. And so to identify areas where there can be cost savings, data center optimization is one of those areas where cost savings in that area could be reinvested into developing new modernized systems.
How many of, speaking of those top priorities in your recommendations, how many of those require the leadership of the CIO?
All 3 areas require the leadership of the CIO. I mean, certainly in the area of the electronic health records modernization, the CIO doesn't play the primary role. He's more of a supporting role for the department, but his leadership still needs to be there because he will be responsible for the infrastructure that's necessary for when that system is deployed.
Thank you. Mr. Aranti, in your recent report on the Forever GI Bill implementation, you found that no one appeared to be in charge of the project. This seems to, unfortunately, be a common theme at the VA. What were your findings regarding the lack of accountability?
Yes, ma'am. We found there was no single accountable management official, and what happened, and you're right, and we agree with you. This seems to be a common theme, and what happens is when it's time to make final decisions about an initiative or an application, there's nobody there to do that. So it stalls the initiative. The initiatives tend to be pushed out the door when they're not ready, and then what we end up seeing is functionality problems with those programs as they mature, and then they try to fix it in flight, so to speak, and they struggle with that. I think they struggle with program management across the board when it comes to IT initiatives.
In your opinion, what do you think, why do you think the VA has found it so difficult?
So without trying to speculate too much, based on our experience, I think there's just, maybe this is a poor analogy, maybe there's too many chefs in the kitchen, and everybody has ownership of a piece of this, and I think there's poor communication between the CIO's office, and the administrations.
Thank you very much. I now yield 5 minutes to Mr. Banks for his questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Harris, the last time you testified before the subcommittee, we were talking about the IPO, the Interagency Program Office, and the management of EHRM and MHS Genesis. Everyone agreed the IPO is not living up to Congress's vision for a single point of accountability. At the time, I promised legislation on the subject. Unfortunately, DoD and VA still have not come to any decisions. Last week, staff began circulating a summary of the legislation. We are working to finalize it. The idea is the IPO should be repurposed to organize all aspects of interoperability, not just the electronic health records, between DoD, VA, and the Office of the National Coordinator. The departments will have to figure out what level of centralized control they want, but we need to focus on comprehensive interoperability. What more can you add today about the IPO's role, and what is your opinion of the concept of that type of legislation?
I appreciate the question, Mr. Banks. I think the IPO, as it is currently operating, is not an effective office for leading or for being that central point of accountability. I think you have two departments, VA and DoD, who are unwilling to relinquish control to a third party to make those decisions. I think that this is actually the most important recommendation that we have made for the EHRM program. If DoD and VA cannot formalize a process for how they're going to adjudicate these really tough issues, they are going to fail again in this fourth attempt at in integrating their systems. So again, having a single point of accountability is crucial, because when the wheels start falling off the bus, we have to be able to identify who is responsible in order to effectively have corrective actions. And in terms of the proposed legislation, we're happy to take a look at it and weigh in. And certainly, we're happy to meet with you to discuss that further.
Appreciate it. I hope we can get there before the wheels fall off the bus and correct the problems before it gets to that point.
Absolutely.
My next question is for anyone who wants to answer it. The major recent organizational changes in OIT seem to be the creation of the IT Operations and Service Division, which centralized the help desk support and the Enterprise Program Management Office, which is the, quote, air traffic control tower, if you will, for all of the IT projects. Are these offices making a positive impact? And if not, how would you improve it?
Every year, we evaluate VA's information security program under FSMA, and we do interact with the ITOPS personnel when we're conducting site visits at 24 VA facilities. We're seeing incremental improvement, some incremental improvements over accountability. We're starting to see roles and responsibilities defined as it relates to IT security, but the improvements have just been marginal at best.
Anybody else? Okay.
I will say, just in terms of centralization, one of the benefits that we've seen, or one of the good things to come out of centralizing IT at VA, is in their software license management area. Previous to VA implementing our recommendations, the management of these licenses were relatively decentralized, and now they actually have a comprehensive inventory of their licenses, and they're able to systematically identify the costs and the usage associated with these individual licenses. And so now they are in a better position to identify cost savings as a result. And so that is one of the benefits of this centralization. I think one of the things that they should be focusing on, if they're going to continue this route, is, when it comes to IT project management and utilizing and sharing IT best practices in the area of, for example, agile software development, they can harness this type of an approach to ensure that their IT project managers are adequately trained in this area, so that they can have adequate oversight over their contractors who are also utilizing the same software methodology.
Appreciate that. I don't have enough time to ask another question, but I'll save more for the second round. With that, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. I'd now like to recognize Ms. Brownlee from California.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for holding this hearing. It's an important one, and I just want to say that I agree with you wholeheartedly about your disappointment and our disappointment that VA has failed to send a witness here for today's hearing. You know, Congress has a huge responsibility in terms of oversight and making sure that VA is hitting its benchmarks and it's modernizing its IT systems, especially with large-scale undertakings like the electronic health record. Already said, fourth attempt. This was an important one to succeed in. All of the IT systems involved in the implementation of the Mission Act, just to name a few, it's critically important that we know. So we put a lot of trust in the VA that they are meeting their benchmarks and moving forward in the time frame that they set out to do. But if they're not here today, it's really very hard to have any confidence or trust that VA is doing what they should be doing. So I share your concerns and I'm disappointed that they are not here. I wanted to follow up with you, Ms. Harris, on your comment around the CIO and the turnover that it's had. If you could tell us, in your opinion, you know, why is this happening? What's causing it? Are there barriers? Is it the job description in and of itself? Why is it that it's so difficult to have a high quality leader in this very important position and hold on to that person?
Well, we've seen a high turnover of CIO leadership across the federal government. This isn't a problem that's specific to the VA necessarily, but the actual tenure of less than 2 years makes VA one of the most challenging of the bunch, for sure. I'm not quite sure as to why specifically VA can't seem to hold on to a CIO. However, I do commend them for recently making the change of ensuring that the CIO does report directly to the Secretary, because that is an important elevation of the position. I think that recent change by VA will actually help them have a CIO stay in the position longer, because when that position is elevated, then you're going to retain and recruit high-quality CIOs. And also, I think that you know, when it comes to the CIO position, if VA can have the CIO, Mr. Jiffer, in this position for about 3 to 5 years, that's when, you know, based on our work, we have seen CIOs become more effective, and especially a large change management program like EHRM, the Electronic Health Records Modernization Program. You're going to want Mr. Jiffer to be in there at least 3 to 5 years, hopefully longer, 5 to 7 years, where we have actually seen success in public sector organizations.
Thank you. You also mentioned, too, that it's going to be necessary for the DOD and the VA to iron out its differences and be on the same page in order to properly implement the EHR modernization. And to me, when I hear that, my sense is that we should stop right now until, you know, we've crossed our T's and dotted our I's before that this has to be ironed out first and foremost. It sounds like this is a critical piece. I mean, common sense will tell you it's a critical piece. It's the reason why we've been unsuccessful over many, many, many years. So what are your recommendations in terms of, you know, how we, in our oversight responsibilities, how we should proceed?
Ensuring that VA fully defines the role of the Interagency Program Office with DoD is the most important action that VA can take to ensure that the EHRM program is a success. If they do not fully define that process with DoD, they are going to fail.
Well, that seems abundantly clear. I know my time's running out, but I just wanted to touch upon the family caregiver program. It's a very important program in terms of its expansion and moving forward. And I know, again, the IT systems have really delayed the implementation of that program, and if there were any comments in terms of how that is progressing. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Ms. Brownlee. I'd now like to recognize Mr. Lamb from Pennsylvania.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. I want to address a couple of big picture questions first, and I apologize if this retreads any ground that you covered before I got here, but I just want to open this to all three witnesses. I see kind of a couple of different ingredients in the recurring problem that we keep having with the electronic health records, with the GI Bill benefits, with some of the issues with disability claims that we've had on the IT side. There's clearly a management and leadership piece in terms of achieving stable leadership in the CIO position and leadership that is willing to show up for relevant hearings. But then obviously there's an investment component as well. There are many people who feel that the IT infrastructure is outdated. There's a kind of recurring problem, it seems like, in federal infrastructure generally, where money gets doled out piecemeal over a lot of years in a way that makes it difficult to ever finish the task of a single big investment. So I guess if you think about those two factors, leadership and money, can you address at all whether one of those is more to blame for the recurring problems that we keep having, or the other, or is it something else entirely?
I can certainly talk about our ongoing work with the VA's implementation of FITARA, and that relates to the CIO's ability to see IT acquisitions across the enterprise, be involved in the planning, programming, budget, and execution aspect of that. And although our draft report is under development, we're seeing that the CIO is not actively involved in the planning and budgeting of IT within all the administrations across the enterprise. I think that has a real adverse effect. And then you combine that with the frequent turnover, it's a recipe for disaster.
Ms. Harris, do you have anything to add to that?
I actually would like to add to what Mr. Bowman is saying about the CIO's absence in the IT budgeting process. Actually, within VA, VA does not have any policies associated with the CIO's roles and responsibilities associated with IT strategic planning whatsoever, and only minimal amount of policies in place related to the IT budgeting aspect. And that's a major problem, especially with this frequent turnover of CIOs that we have. Having codified policies that ensures that the CIO establishes goals for improving agency operations through IT and measuring progress against those goals is absolutely critical. So we have made recommendations in this area, and VA should be we want VA to implement them as soon as possible.
Thank you. And I think the kind of separate issue that's hanging out there, I think that makes a lot of sense for the year-over-year regular budgeting for IT investments, maintenance, that kind of thing. Obviously, we have the second massive project with the electronic health records. Given the instability in leadership that we've talked about, again, the unwillingness to show up to a relevant hearing, do you have any suggestions to us as to how we can make sure that this EHR project actually stays on schedule and within budget, or at least that we know when there is a red flag? You know, we don't want to happen on the VA side what happened on the DoD side with this sort of disastrous rollout when it was showtime. So any specific suggestions there?
Well, the first is defining the role of the IPO and having a single point of accountability, ensuring that DoD and VA have a formalized process for adjudicating those tough issues. That's the first piece. The second piece is ensuring that VA develops a comprehensive baseline for its EHRM program with a reliable cost estimate and a reliable schedule with performance targets that can be tracked. Because what we have seen in these large major IT programs with VA is that they lack this baseline plan. And so it's really challenging to hold their management accountable in the absence of a plan. So those are the two key things that VA needs to be set up for success.
Would that differ from the way the DoD did the rollout at the limited number of sites? I mean, I guess, what are you saying specifically in terms of a performance target? Can you give an example?
Well, I mean, the rollout of sites, I'm not saying that should be necessarily different. I think piloting is certainly the way to go, but having performance targets associated with the system itself, for example, in measuring system defects or measuring customer satisfaction, those are key areas that VA will have to make sure that they have measurable targets in place for.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. I'll now like to recognize Mr. Banks for additional questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. First of all, Ms. Harris, in your testimony, you write that the VA operates 240 information systems. Could you put that into perspective for me a little bit? Is that a lot for an agency the size of the VA? And about how many systems would VA need under optimal conditions?
Well, VA operates one of the most complex and largest IT networks within the civilian agencies. And when you look at their IT budget, it is the third highest behind DHS and HHS. I can't tell you what the right number of systems should be, but considering that 80% of their budget goes to maintaining old legacy systems, that's a major problem, both from an operational perspective, of having to ensure that they have the personnel in place to maintain old code, but also from a cybersecurity perspective as well. That's a major challenge for them. So
240 a lot, or that because of the complexity of the systems, that's within range of what you would expect?
I would say that number is high. And again, taking a look at where the money is going, since only 20% of their money is going towards developing modernized systems, that makes it a problem. So there isn't enough money available to invest into, decreasing that, turning off old legacy systems and investing into new systems. I can't tell you what the right number would be, but
thank you for that. I'll move on. Mr. Bowman, I understand that you manage the VA cybersecurity audit under the Federal Information Security Modernization Act. In 2015, you found 35 weaknesses. Last year, you found 28. That seems like slow progress towards securing veterans' data. Historically, what has VA done to address the FISMA recommendations, and how would you characterize their progress?
So when I first came to VA to become the director back in 2008, there was about 33 outstanding recommendations in connection to the FISMA work. So that you compare that today, from our most recent report, we're now down to 28 recommendations. Most of the improvement that I've seen VA do is really, it's in policy, it's in plans of actions and milestones. Incident handling and response has also made an improvement. But as far as making corrections and remediations to address access control issues, configuration management issues, disaster recovery issues, the progress has been just marginal at best.
So what are the barriers that are preventing the VA from going, 35 to 28, that doesn't seem like very good progress to me. What's stopping us from substantially diminishing that number?
In my opinion, that VA has to implement a more robust vulnerability management program. They need to be able to identify the vulnerabilities and correct them before we conduct our FISMA audits. And there are times where VA is seeing these issues at the same time that we're seeing them every year. And so that has to be a more proactive program. They need to be able to patch their systems in a more timely manner. We're finding systems that are outdated with security updates by more than 2 years, and these are on the mission-critical systems. They also need to make IT security a priority, and there are years where we just don't feel that they're dedicating the resources to take these issues seriously.
So it's a lack of urgency.
In my opinion, yes.
Okay, of the 28 recommendations last year, the VA didn't concur with 3 of them, claiming that they had already been resolved. Can you explain these recommendations and whether or not you agree with the VA's position?
So part of it is that we sat with VA several times. We asked for them to provide us supporting documentation so that we could conclude whether or not the corrective action plans have been remediated. VA did not provide them to us, nor were we able to perform any subsequent testing. And for that reason, those recommendations remain. Now, going forward, we're going to put efforts to see whether or not those corrective action plans are effectively mitigating the vulnerabilities. It just remains to be seen right now, but I don't feel VA made a concerted effort to give us the information we were asking for.
All right, let me get one more question in really quick. Continuing on the same subject, what are the VA's most significant risk from its many systems that are connected with external organizations?
I think it's very important you got to monitor all system interconnections on the VA network. They've got hundreds of business partners. They've got numerous connections in and out of the network. VA doesn't monitor all those systems. Now, going forward, there's only maybe about 5 or 6 that aren't monitored, which is better than how they were doing 4 or 5 years ago. But you really shouldn't have any interconnections that weren't monitored, because your business partners, their security postures may be far worse than VA, and it could be a vector right into your network. And without monitoring it, VA doesn't know whether or not its systems are infiltrated.
Thank you. My time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. I want to talk about, successful IT programs require that agencies know exactly what they're building or buying, who the users are, and what they're actually going to need. This is requirements development, and it takes a lot of legwork by the agency to research and talk to stakeholders, and it's also a place where many agencies under time and money constraints tend to fall short. Mr. Aranti or Ms. Harris, either one of you, what are some of the best practices that the GAO and OIG have identified regarding requirements development and recommendations?
One of the most critical success factors in delivering major IT programs is, as you mentioned, the requirements development and management, ensuring that the program is adequately involving the end users in the development of those requirements, and then from there prioritizing requirements. Because if, for example, funding becomes unstable or gets cut, you're going to want to be able to very quickly de-scope the program as necessary. And so those are the 2 critical success factors that we have found regarding requirements in delivering IT systems.
I definitely agree that agile software development practices are important. The sooner you get the end users involved in developing the requirements and testing it and on the rollout, you're more likely to hit your targets. But I think it's also important that VA stabilize their functionality requirements. A lot of times in these projects, they'll go in with a general idea what they want, and as they start developing a road plan, they realize that they need a lot more functionality to achieve end user goals and to meet the goals of the project. So without stabilizing that, you're not going to hit your schedule, you're not going to hit your cost goals, and then the system will not perform as intended.
Thank you. Mr. Aranti, the OIG reviewed the issue of unwarranted medical examinations for disability benefits and found that the VBA needed to take steps to prioritize the design and implementation of system automation reasonably designed to minimize unwarranted reexaminations. The VBA then concurred with the recommendation, but the OIG website says it was not implemented because, quote, the recommendation was unable to be satisfactorily addressed despite significant efforts due to the lack of resources or other reasons. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, so, and this was kind of a surprise to us. Typically, we meet with the department and we discuss our recommendations. They came back, they felt that the recommendation was a good recommendation that they wanted to implement, and then as they started moving along the course to implement, OI&T came and told them, well, we might be able to do this, but it's going to be 18 to 24 months before we can do this. And when we make our recommendations, we try to gear our recommendations to be implementable within a year. So once VBA leadership was notified that this was not going to happen in a year, they came back to us and said, look, we're not going to be able to do this. Not that we don't agree with it and not that we don't want it, but OINT is telling us 18 to 24 months.
So there was no way to sort of define what could be accomplished within a year?
No, and OINT's, the way they prioritize what's important is I can speak from VBA senior leadership has conveyed to me that it's unclear to them how OINT prioritizes work across the department.
Okay, that's surprising. Ms. Harris, one more question. I have just a little bit of time. One of the issues that the GAO cited with regards to the Forever GI Bill implementation was that the VBA Education Service and the Office of Information and Technology could not agree on what a working solution was. You know, we've talked about having a single point of accountability can be helpful to prevent this type of disagreements. But what other types of mechanisms can an agency have in place that would help keep the project scope on track?
Well, certainly having strong leadership in place is absolutely vital, and ensuring that program staff have the necessary knowledge and skills from an IT management and contractor oversight perspective. Those are two major areas that are common to successfully delivering an IT system.
Thank you. I now yield to Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Arante or Mr. Bowman, the VA also undergoes a financial statement audit every year, which includes IT systems and cybersecurity. I understand there are many material weaknesses in that audit as well. What actions should VA take to correct the material weaknesses?
So Mr. Bowman is going to speak specifically to some of the IT challenges. We do have one that's directly related to information technology, and it's ensuring effective information security program and system controls. And one of the things that we see, we've talked about budget and management and you know which one is more or less important. With these security controls and the CIO not being part of the budget process, what we find is medical centers are purchasing IT equipment under their own budget. And then what happens is the CIO is unaware that this equipment has been purchased, so the CIO is not, there's no process to ensure that the security of this equipment is in place because the CIO was unaware of it.
Related to IT, even though that my focus is of FSMA, part of that focus is to evaluate the IT controls in connection with the consolidated financial statement audits as well. And so what we see in FSMA is basically duplicate issues that we find for the consolidated financial statement. So the real issues, the way for VA to remediate the material weakness and get it downgraded to a significant deficiency is we got to see password controls consistently implemented across all systems. And we still see passwords with the same username and password, sometimes 2 and 3 years running. We've got default passwords. And, you know, when you're briefing the VA secretary and we start explaining that, it's really uncomfortable because that seems like very low-hanging fruit. And why is that a discussion point every year when we brief out on the financial statements? So that's first and foremost. The other thing is...
You've briefed that over and over again, but little to no progress in addressing it.
It certainly gets a lot of airtime at the meetings, and you know there's a lot of focus that says, well, we're going to get rid of this next year. Either our testing methods are very good or just VA is lax. It's hard to tell. Sometimes we just go back and test the same systems and we'll find those same user accounts with unchanged passwords. But the other thing is VA has legacy systems that are no longer supported by the vendor. So they can't update those systems for hot fixes and security patches to address emerging IT security issues. And so unless you resolve those, the material weakness will remain.
Unbelievable. But let's move on. Mr. Arante, in your testimony, you cite the VA IT budget proposal as $4.3 billion. Does that include all IT spending?
No, sir, it does not. And as I alluded to earlier, what happens is VHA has a specific line item for the purchases of IT equipment, which I was in a meeting, and we asked the CFO at the time, why is there a specific line item for the hospitals or the VAMCs or the VISNs to purchase IT equipment without going to the CIO? And what we were told was it takes the CIO's office too long to approve equipment that we need now.
So let me ask you, what are the practical consequences of having IT activities that the Chief Information Officer isn't aware of?
So, one, cost overruns. Two, duplication of IT acquisition equipment. And third, not being able to, because you are unaware of this equipment, you can't place security on it. You can't track it, and then it becomes an inventory issue as well.
That's startling and troubling, and with that, I'll yield back.
I'm going to continue on this with respect to the electronic health records revamp that we're doing in terms of the acquisition process. Do you have recommendations? I mean, we have the $10 billion contract with Cerner and then the $6 billion that the VA needs to use for the infrastructure, the equipment. Are there recommendations you have to make sure that process is as successful as possible?
So we have not done any formal work with EHR. We have staff that attend clinical council meetings to monitor the progress. Right now, we understand that there are discussions between VA and DoD on medical coding. Until some of that is resolved, I'm not sure what our role is going to be with the limited resources we have. But I think a good answer is look at the past practices. Look at the past, like Mr. Banks indicated, 33 recommendations, 28 recommendations. They can't get security on equipment right. I think VA risks, this is a behavior for VA. And I think what is the potential risk for EHR is these types of behaviors will roll over into this initiative. And that's what we're looking at right now.
Okay.
Madam Chair, we intend to initiate work on the EHR program very soon. We have ongoing work at VISTA as well as ongoing work on the DoD side, the MHS Genesis program. So we have not made specific recommendations related to the EHR acquisition itself, but we do have the one outstanding recommendation to define the role of the interagency program office. And again, as I mentioned earlier, if that process hasn't been formalized, whatever VA does on the acquisition end it's ultimately going to fail in terms of the interoperability with DoD.
Thank
So
you.
they have to get that right.
Thank you. Well, this has been somewhat depressing, but also a helpful discussion, and we certainly look forward to working with the VA to ensure that we help overcome these deficiencies, because ultimately making sure that we're successful means better care for our veterans, which is ultimately the goal for all of us. So I look forward to continuing as the subcommittee moves forward with oversight of technology and modernization at the VA. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for your attendance and your testimony and your patience in answering these questions. And all members will have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material. And this hearing has now been adjourned. Thank you.